So now we're on the third of our four cardinal virtues. And this evening, the star of the show is temperance. And the shortest definition I could find of it was the quality of moderation and self-restraint, which turns out to be very appropriate because the word temporare in Latin means restraint, and the word temperantia in Latin means moderation. So I think we could kind of see where it came from. And Maria, why don't you just go ahead and set up the screen so we can start showing our cartoons and stuff? And just leave it up until we finish with that, because there'd be a lot of pictures in a row here. As always, I managed to find what I thought were suitable Calvin and Hobbes illustrations of the principle.
Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay.
So in a certain sense, as you know, Calvin and Hobbes are sort of opposites in some strange way. And I think it's fair to say Calvin is the virtual idealization of a lack of self-restraint and a lack of moderation. And I thought I love the line. I'm not sure total self-indulgence is really a principle, which is clearly. And then the next one shows moderation in action, as Calvin winds up deferring to Hobbes. So I think it's fair to say that in contrast to Calvin, Hobbes represents the ability to find the perfect middle, which in this case is a book by a warm fireplace instead of suicidal toboggan rides. Okay. Well, the word moves on. And once again, I guess probably with all the cardinal virtues, I guess courage isn't a name, but temperance certainly is. So does anybody recognize this face, this actress? I didn't watch the show, but there used to be actually I ran for 10 years, so it's quite a while, a show called Bones.
Yes.
This is one of the two lead characters, and it was kind of a mystery show. And her name is Temperance in this show. Although, in fact, she's the antithesis of it. And she's the one who's the part of the fun of the show was the two characters. One of them is an atheist, and the other is a kind of a faithful person, and they're always battling forth about whether atheism is an appropriate. And she represents atheism, which so I don't think the name was well chosen in that sense. But she's the only woman I could come up with that was named Temperance. So that or at least it came up on the internet. There must be others. It could also be a band. So show me some band ads here. I must admit, I've never heard of either of these bands. Those of you who are more plugged in may be familiar with them.
Prince one.
Can you?
The temperance is, oh, well, you've gone ahead.
All right.
That's okay.
Can you see that better? I just did something funny.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so Temperance is a band in Italy, which I'd never heard of, and the other one, the Temperance Seven, is obviously a more traditional pre-rock and roll band, I guess you'd say. And of course, it's going to be a brand. You can already see the next slide and put it up so they see it in full size. And so I particularly like the idea of a distillery being Temperance. I couldn't think of a more inappropriate name for a whiskey distributor than Temperance, but obviously somebody accepted the challenge. And the other is a brand of whipped cream, which I've never heard of, Temperance whipped cream. You can get it in favorite flavors. So
Shouldn't it be called intemperance and not temperance?
Yeah.
That might not be encouraging the overindulgence they want.
anyway, it's worth hearing what the kind of related words are. I always like to look up the related words. And so Temper as a verb means to dilute or soften by addition or influence of something else. It's to moderate something. So, for example, you temper justice with mercy, or you temper metal to make it more malleable. Temper as a noun is a state of mind.
To dilute or soften by addition or influence of something.
Just a second, I need to turn off my phone.
Just to
I don't know why I never understand why my phone does what it does. I think I'll just turn it off here. So I've lost all sense of where, let's see, so temperance, so we lose our mind or we keep one's temper. Intemperate generally means lack of self-control, given to excessive indulgence, of course, especially related to alcohol. And then temperature itself, of course, literally means a due or proper measure. So we all have temperatures, but we all know there's a proper one. So, and some of you will have lived through the next cartoon. So I just brought in Calvin and Dilbert on temperature. You want to give us the next cartoon?
Okay.
I think most of us who've worked in an office have had this battle fight out in real life. Some of us fight it out at home, but I won't get into that. Okay.
Yeah, in corporate America, you're not, you have no say.
Yeah,
So-
well, I don't have any say at home either, but that's a different conversation.
I always wore sweaters to work.
One of our senior wardens suggested that everybody in the congregation be given a thermostat.
Yeah, as long as they're not connected to anything. it's-
They would not be connected to anything, but at least they would have their own personal thermostat.
Somebody told me that whenever you see an elevator that has a closed door button, it's not really connected to anything, but people feel better punching the closed door button.
Is that really true?
I don't know, probably.
No.
No, that's not true.
Oh, no, it should be true. Come on. Anyway, there is, of course, a traditional representation of temperance. So give me the two temperance ladies here. The first one, I'd forgotten that temperance is a tarot card. I've never played tarot or used a tarot deck, but there she is. She's number 14 in the temperance deck of cards. And the other one is a more traditional, non-magical statue. The interesting thing is in both of them, the symbol of temperance is diluting wine with water, pouring water from one thing into another, which holds wine. And
That's weird.
pardon?
I said that's weird. No, I mean not weird. It's very interesting
Yeah,
because
the
of
symbol
what
goes-
we do on the altar.
Yeah.
yeah, the symbol goes way back, very long before Christianity. And there are two explanations for it that may explain it. It was very common in the ancient world to water wine down, I think in part because most wine was pretty low quality. And the other thing was that if you mixed wine with water, to some extent, you purified it. You know, the wine would have things that would kill infections of various sorts of the water. And of course, bad water was a real problem. So it's a question of whether you were adding the wine to the water or the water to the wine, but it was a long-standing tradition, and of course became a symbol of moderation. So temperance classically meant restraint of the appetites and passions in accordance with reason. It's long been valued by religious thinkers, philosophers, and more recently psychologists. It's a very important value for a healthy mind, I think, nowadays. One thing I'd not thought of, but I was reading that there's a distinction to be made between temperance and self-control. A person who exhibits self-control refrains from giving into unwise desires, whereas a person who exhibits temperance does not have unwise desires in the first place because they have wisely shaped their character so that their desires are proper ones. And I must say, by that standard, I've never attained temperance.
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought it was an interesting distinction. Not surprisingly, Christianity has long been considered a cardinal virtue. In the Episcopal dictionary that we've used regularly now, temperance is defined as the perfection of the appetites, seeking enough, but not too much. Temperance is the moral virtue that moderates the attraction of pleasure. And so for Christians, temperance is more often than not associated with control of the body. You don't eat too much, you don't drink too much, whatever it may be. Temperance is a strong part of the religious tradition even before Christianity. In Proverbs 25, line 28, a person who lacks self-control is like a city whose walls are broken through. The New Testament does a lot with temperance as well. It is one of the fruits of the Spirit. In St. Paul's letter to the Galatians, and I'll quote here, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. And something I just discovered this week because of the reading I'm doing elsewhere, I did not realize that in the book of Revelation, drinking wine unmixed with water is equated with the wrath of God. Which never would have occurred to me, but in Revelations, one of the things that marks the evil people condemned to damnation is that they drink their wine unmoderated with water. So keep that in mind in the future.
So interesting that one of the newer translations of it's a children's hymn about the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and it said it's replaced temperance with self-control. So it's interesting that there's a definitional difference.
Yeah, I think that the definitional difference only comes up for really serious linguists. I mean, I think for most of us, temperance and self-control are synonymous. Certainly, I think of them as the same, but it is an interesting distinction. And of course, as somebody mentioned, in the Catholic Mass, mixing water and wine before consecration is required. And I must say, this sort of answered a long-standing question for me because before I started coming to St. Luke's, I'd never seen wine being diluted. And I associate with Catholicism and Episcopalianism more than other traditions. I don't know whether Lutherans do or Baptists do. Certainly Presbyterians don't, but of course they use grape juice anyway, so that's hopeless.
Go to the Baptist.
Yeah.
The Baptists certainly aren't going to drink wine.
Yeah, but it is you think about this. I looked it up in a Catholic dictionary. I don't know what the official Episcopalian explanation is, but in the Catholic dictionary it says this mixing of wine and water is significant because of what it represents. The water represents Christ's humanity and the wine his divinity. So take that for what it's worth. But of course, there's also that line in Revelation about unmixed wine is the wrath of God, and just generally moderation.
But
there's
go ahead, Nancy.
sorry, there's another viewpoint that I only learned when we were working on the instructed Eucharist that we did a few months ago with Reverend Ann, that the mixing of the water and the wine represents the combining of the divinity of Jesus with the people. So water represents the people and the wine represents God, and they are inextricably combined right before communion is served to I guess prove the point that that we are all united in that act of communion.
That's great. And one other thing somebody mentioned to me that I haven't done any reading on this, but somebody said that in one of the descriptions of the execution of Christ, that when his side is pierced, both water and blood come out.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so that would be another.
I was gonna bring that up, and that's also symbolic of in the Jewish temples when they sacrificed animals
And
on the altar, water and blood would flow out the sink underneath the altar.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that's why water and blood flew out of Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice, right? And then the mixing of the water and the wine. So I know ever since Nancy told me, and Paul, you reiterated that tonight, that it represents the humanity and the divinity. It's just it brings that whole moment to life on the altar.
Yeah. It's just great to see how many, how complex something as simple as this is, that it can represent so many things to so many different people. And like a lot of traditions, it no doubt, I have no idea. I don't know enough of the history of Christian practice to know whether there was a point at which mixing wine with water, maybe it was always the case, and it just started being sort of theorized more later. Or I did read that in Catholic theology, if water is not mixed, it doesn't invalidate the sacrament. It reduces its complexity, but it doesn't. It's still a sacrament, even if they forget to add the water, according to what I read, anyway.
And
Anyway,
I had
go
also been associated it with the water and the blood coming from Jesus' side whenever they pierced his side. That's, I think, maybe whenever I was going through confirmation classes, that was maybe part of it. I don't know, but that's what I've always associated it with.
Well, anyway, just to wrap up on Christianity in particular, it won't surprise that some of you may have even watched the video. Thomas Aquinas has a lot to say on this, as he does on everything. But the important idea is that for Aquinas and for Christian theologians generally, temperance is not a contradiction of pleasure. Temperate man does not shun pleasure, but shuns immoderate pleasure or pleasure that is contrary to reason. Temperance is a disposition of the mind which regulates the passions. It doesn't eliminate them. Most interesting of all, show me the next picture now. So I asked Maria, and she didn't know. Do any of you recognize this lady?
I bet it's Carrie Nation.
Yes.
Not
I
very-
that was exactly, I did not know her name, but I think I was trying to think, whoever the woman was that was headed up the temperance movement that gave us prohibition.
Yeah. She's sometimes known as Hatchet, the Hatchet Lady, because she was passionate enough in her support of the temperance movement that she often just went into bars with a hatchet and started smashing things up. But of course, because she was a lady, nobody would try to restrain her. She was a very zealous and influential person. But I bring it up here because I think it's fair to say that of all the Christian virtues and the cardinal virtues, temperance is the only one that has actually become a political force with a lasting influence on American politics and culture through what you all know as the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was one of the very first organizations of women devoted to social reform. A lot of the early temperance women also wanted to vote, but temperance was the leading force for the movement originally. And it's interesting that in their own description of their work, they call their move for temperance applied Christianity, which I found to be a fascinating term. That, we're not just Christians, we're going to go out there and do something with it. And of all the things they might have done, temperance is what drove them to effective action.
I
And-
find it interesting that their aim was to eliminate alcohol instead of moderate its
Yep.
use, but yet they chose the word temperance.
Yeah, good point. I'm not certain they were a very humorous group.
Well, I think that anybody who has to unbutton and button that many buttons in a day, be very happy.
Well, anyway,
Well, one of the things that I think about her is that, given what happened with Prohibition and how it didn't work out the way people who passed Prohibition thought it was going to, and led to a lot of gangs and stuff, that that it kind of changed the image that, granted, she would sometimes smash up saloons, but the drive at the time when when temperance was taking off was because it was a time when there were a lot of men who would go to bars at the end of the week, and they get paid, and they would spend all their money in the bar, and then they go home and beat up their wives, and there wasn't much in legal terms to defend the women, so that there was a serious aspect to it that kind of, I think I'd say, got just overcome and laughed at in a way that initially, when Paul said applied Christianity, that they were had serious concerns for the welfare of the family and of women in a way that kind of then got dropped.
anyway, I can't resist pointing out one other irony, that Prohibition was voted in before women were allowed to vote. And one of the very first things that happened after women were allowed to vote was that Prohibition was voted out. So you can make of that what you will too, in terms of gender politics. The last thing I should say is that even though the 18th Amendment has been annulled, Christianity continues to play a significant role in a certain kind of temperance movement, and that is in Alcoholics Anonymous, which has grew out of a Christian movement. And although it's not officially Christian anymore, it still has heavy religious dimensions to it. I don't know whether any of you have ever been to one of their meetings or read anything about Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's a very important group in American culture.
I spent many years going to Al-Anon meetings, which were out for friends and family members.
Yeah.
And and a couple of times we were invited to attend AA meetings, and they're very and I would highly recommend Al-Anon to anybody that's ever had to deal with alcoholism in their family.
Yeah.
It certainly, my mother was an alcoholic, and I attended adult children of alcoholic meetings after she had died. And through sitting there and listening to those people talk, I came to a very good relationship with my mother. It's a shame I did not have the opportunity to do that before she died, but I highly recommend it to anybody.
That's great.
Mhm.
My late brother-in-law had been a serious alcoholic and then joined, and it really changed his life. So I certainly know it can be an effective movement. Anyway, just to move on to our discussion. Go ahead. Did somebody want to add something?
Going to say the same thing. No, I was just going to add to that about people with, there's I don't even know what it's called, Drugs Anonymous. Because I have known people that has saved their lives too.
Narcanon.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap up with a couple of the point I look for always for a way to make this a discussion, and it seemed to me that temperance is one of the virtues we use to deal with the 7 deadly sins. So I have a couple of 7 deadly sin cartoons here. I don't think you can read the text on the first, but you can see there.
Can you zoom in, Maria?
Yeah, I don't think they're legible, but one of them is yeah, just leave
No,
that.
I'm just trying to, I gotta move the share screen bar so I can increase size. Just takes a minute, because this, there we go. Now we can go up to 100%.
Just leave it where it is. Just leave it there. That's enough.
Here, go to this one.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to try, I'm not certain it's legible once you blow it up. So
Can you guys see that?
Can you blow it up?
See.
Yeah,
I see Belgian waffles. I see adult,
a beauty shop, a bar,
adult
A
videos.
bar, adult
off-track
videos.
betting, pornography. You get the idea.
Mhm.
Vanity. All right, give us the next one, and then we'll be done. I like this one. Bring it down so they can read the caption.
Wow.
Now we know what sells.
Yep, we know what sells. Okay, that's it. You can turn off let's just put us all back on the screen now. So I thought,
If you'd have looked up intemperance, you would have come up with a line of cigars, because we have a line called intemperance.
well, that's good to know.
Oh,
They
cool.
don't pretend to be temperate. Yeah, they don't pretend to be temperate.
Intemperance cigars.
Yes.
Love it.
I must say, if I ever get a chance to buy temperance whiskey, I probably will, just to prove it can be done. But
That's why I told you I thought the whiskey should be intemperance too.
quite right. Anyway, the point being that so many of the 7 deadly sins, not all of them, but many of them relate to our physical bodies. We lose our temper, wrath, envy. We envy something somebody has. Pride. We think too highly of ourselves. Lust is obviously a bodily function. Gluttony, laziness. So I thought what we would do is, let me just remind you what the 7 are. And then I would like to go around and let everybody take a shot and explain. We're not looking for confessions here, just understanding. But is there any one of the 7 deadly sins where where you feel that being a Christian has actually influenced your ability to avoid it, or to moderate it, or is it? I mean, you don't have to be a Christian to want to resist sin, but does Christianity in some way have an impact on your, or does it not? Maybe I should go first. When I think of the 7 deadly sins and how they apply to me, I'll be the first to admit that they all do in one way or another. But the one I'm most conscious of all the time is gluttony. I like to eat. I like to eat way too much, and I have a terrible weight problem. I'm hugely overweight. I've been overweight all my life. I've always known it's bad for me. I feel ashamed about it. I feel guilty about it. But you put me down in front of a plate of spaghetti and I wolf it down and then think, oh, I'm so ashamed of myself. And I can't honestly say that even though I know it's a sin, gluttony is also just bad judgment. But knowing it's a sin doesn't, for me, it doesn't make a difference in my behavior. I wish it did. So that's my example. And I don't know, maybe some of you have more successful stories to tell. Who would like to go?
Are we
Somebody-
gonna keep recording here, Maria?
No, let's turn it off.
I think we should stop